Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating idea from Lotfy Mahrous's book, The God Habit. It asks a pretty basic question. Why do we humans make gods? And the answer it gives, well, it has less to do with theology and a whole lot more to do with engineering. The book kicks off with this line, and man, it just hits you. It immediately grounds you in reality. Forget all the high-minded philosophical debates for a second. Just picture our ancestors, right? Huddled together while a massive storm is just ripping their world apart. Their first concern wasn't some deep argument about the nature of existence. No way. It was just pure, raw survival against a world that felt random, incredibly powerful, and frankly, like it didn't care about them at all. And that's really the crucial point here. The whole idea of gods didn't start as some grand search for cosmic truth. Not at all. It was a super practical response to a set of really brutal problems. I'm talking hunger, sickness, those terrifying storms, death, the big stuff. They needed a tool, a way to coordinate with each other, to find a little courage, to make any kind of sense out of the chaos. What they needed was a technology for living. And this is where we get to the core metaphor of the whole book, and it's brilliant. Think about it. You can't physically grab on to meaning, right? Or grief or community. They're invisible. But you can grab a cup. You can light a candle. You can follow a calendar. And in this view, that's what gods became. They're the handles, the names we gave to these repeatable practices that let us do the invisible but totally essential work of being human. Okay, so if we're calling this a technology, what problems was it actually built to solve? Well, the book argues that it all boils down to three fundamental human hungers. And these aren't just ancient history. They're primal needs that are just as real for you and me today as they were thousands of years ago. So, what are they? It comes down to these three. First up, protection. Just that desperate gut-level need for safety in a world that can feel completely random. Then there's pattern. You know how our brains are wired. We have to find a story, find a signal in the noise. It's a relentless drive. And finally, belonging. That deep, ancient ache to be part of a we, especially when we feel totally, utterly alone. And the technology that was built over millennia to satisfy these three hungers, that's what the book calls the God Habit. Now, it's really important to get this. The God Habit isn't just about what you believe. It's about what you do. It's this incredible human knack for taking a deep need, let's say the need for rest, and turning it into a repeatable practice, like a weekly sabbath. And then we give it moral weight, we make it important so that we actually, do it. It's a habit of how we pay attention, how we coordinate, and what we feel obligated to do. So let's stick with this idea of it being a technology. What were its actual functions? What jobs did the God Habit really perform for a community? And this is where it gets interesting, because it turns out it's a kind of bargain. It came with some absolutely incredible benefits, but also some very, very real costs. And this really lays out that fundamental bargain. On one side, you've got all the good stuff, the crucial jobs this habit does when it's working like it's supposed to. But on the flip side, there are these hidden costs, these hidden invoices. We're going to get to those. But first, let's talk about the benefits. Man, when it works, the God Habit is an absolutely amazing social tool. Think about it. It coordinates massive efforts, like getting an entire village to plant or harvest at the exact right time. It focuses our scattered attention through rituals. It gives us courage, real courage, through shared songs and stories. And maybe most importantly, it offers this incredibly deep consolation. It gives grief a choreography, a set of steps to follow so it doesn't just completely drown you. The book has this perfect little story to illustrate this, the parable of the bowl. So there's this village, and every single household gets a bowl. Whenever a guest visits, they add a little bit of grain to it. Then, when someone in the village gets sick, the community empties the bowl for them. It's that simple. But when you ask them why they do it, they say, because we are the kind of people who do not let our bowls stay full when someone else's is empty. You see, the ritual itself, the simple act, created the identity that kept the whole village going. But, of course, there's always another side to the ledger, right? This technology, this habit, it comes with some really serious hidden costs. And being honest about them is absolutely crucial if we're going to understand the whole picture. And this quote, this one really gets to the heart of the problem. Every we draws a line. Just think about that. The very same act that creates that warm, fuzzy feeling of a we that belongs, it automatically creates a they that doesn't. And yeah, it builds identity, for sure. But it can also twist into a justification for cruelty. It can become a permission slip to see outsiders as, well, less than human. So how do you deal with that tension? There's another great story, the parable of the rope. Imagine a town that long ago tied this big rope between all the houses so people could find their way home safely in a bad storm. Okay, generations pass. The storms aren't as bad anymore, and now the rope is just kind of old and ugly. Some people want to tear it down. But then a child has an idea. What if we take down the rope, but leave a single knot tied by each person's front door? And suddenly, these knots become a memory you can actually touch, a reminder of safety, of community. They kept the function of the rope, the feeling of connection, but they were smart enough to adopt the form.
Okay, so we've seen the good and we've seen the bad. We know the benefits and the costs. What do we do with all this? Well, this brings us to what might be the most important idea in the whole book: practical salvage. How do we figure out a way to keep all the good stuff and lose the stuff that does harm?
And I really want to emphasize this. The goal here is not to just tear everything down, to insult our ancestors or humiliate people of faith. Not at all. It's about salvage. It's like going through an old house you've inherited. You respectfully sort through everything. You figure out which heirlooms are still beautiful and useful, which parts are just rotten, and you decide how to make the good stuff work for you today.
And the book gives us this incredibly useful framework for doing that salvage work. It suggests we sort our traditions, our habits, into 3 buckets. First, what should we keep? The no-brainers, things like shared meals, scheduled rest, the stuff that just works. Second bucket, what can we translate? This is cool. Maybe an ancient law about a Sabbath becomes a modern habit of a weekly digital detox. Same function, new form. And finally, the hard one. What must we release? This is for the parts that are actively causing harm. The things like cruelty wrapped in a hymn, or any kind of certainty that punishes people for asking honest questions.
So what this all leads to is a kind of revised bargain for our time, a new promise. We don't have to perform these acts to please some distant, invisible power. We do them for a much more direct reason. We do them because these practices, rest, repair, singing, organizing, these are the very things that shape us into the kind of people who can actually keep each other from ruin. The payoff isn't in the afterlife. The benefit is immediate, and it's deeply human.
And please remember this. This is a practice, not a perfect performance. We are absolutely going to fail. We're going to miss the mark. We'll forget. But maybe the most sacred part of any habit, any practice, is just the willingness to start over, to begin again, without beating ourselves up about it. In fact, maybe the holiest phrase there is just begin again.
So I want to leave you with this final question. You don't need permission for this. You don't need a committee. You don't need a priest or a guru. What is one small sacred act, an act of rest or repair or generosity that you will do for yourself or for your community? Not for any grand reason, but simply because it makes life a little more human. What will you do without asking anyone for permission?